change their fortunes in just a generation. And those that stand still risk sliding backwards. It is time for us to raise the bar of our ambitions, to demand more of ourselves, to shape a new vision for Kenya. This is not the task for leaders alone, neither is it for the government alone. It's a responsibility for Kenyans themselves. As the Constitution commands,
all sovereign powers belongs to the people of Kenya and shall be, underline the word in shall, mandatory.
We, the people, shall take charge of the national conversation of our collective future together. Stay tuned to President William Ruto's special address to the nation on Kenya's future. A nation is not ultimately defined by where it begins or where it stands today, but by the future it has the courage to build. The history of global development teaches
generations as a result. This national conversation must rise above politics, transcend electoral cycles, and unite us around a shared destiny. For 2 decades, Vision 2030 shaped our national development priorities, informed public policy, catalyzed investments, and most importantly, inspired the promulgation of our new constitution. As Vision 2030 approaches its horizon, our responsibility is not simply to replace it with another government document or plan. Our responsibility is far greater under the 2010 Constitution, that is, to craft a new national development charter that gives effect to the development imperatives enshrined in the Constitution and to decide together what kind of Kenya we want to build over the next generation and beyond. That conversation belongs to each one of us and to all of us. But before we decide where we should go next, we must first reflect honestly on the journey we have traveled. Since our independence more than 6 decades ago, the world has witnessed 3 great waves of industrialization and economic transformation, and Kenya has stood at the threshold of each one of them. Each wave lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, transformed low-income economies into high-income nations, and created new centers of high economic growth, manufacturing, innovation, and global prosperity. The past unfolded between the 1960s and 80s. It involved the East Asian tigers, including South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, which transformed themselves into prosperous, high-income, industrialized economies. The second was in the late 1970s. China, together with Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Mauritius, embarked on bold economic reforms that lifted hundreds of millions of their citizens out of poverty and transformed their economies into globally competitive manufacturing and investment hubs. The third wave began in the early 90s. Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, and Cape Verde embraced reforms, expanded exports, attracted investments, and fundamentally changed the trajectory of their economies within one generation. Our country was present in all these major developments, but we did not take full advantage of them. In 1965, for example, Kenya and South Korea each had a GDP per capita of approximately 110 US dollars. Today, South Korea exceeds 36,000 US dollars compared to ours of 2,400 US dollars, a multiple of 15. In 1980, when China began its economic reforms, its GDP per capita stood at approximately 200 US dollars. Kenya's was then 450 US dollars. China overtook us and today has a GDP per capita exceeding 14,000 US dollars, a multiple of 6 compared to ours. When Vietnam embarked on economic reforms in the early 90s, Vietnam's income per person was roughly half ours. Today, Vietnam's GDP per capita stands at approximately 5,000 US dollars, more than double ours. Bangladesh has followed a similar remarkable path. Even more sobering is the fact that we are now being challenged by countries much closer to home. Ghana's GDP per capita is about 3,200 US dollars, roughly 30% higher than ours. While Zimbabwe, after enduring decades of profound economic hardship, has recovered to a GDP per capita of about 3,000 US dollars, now slightly exceeding ours. The question we must ask ourselves candidly and honestly is why other nations have fulfilled so much of their potential while we have repeatedly fallen short. More importantly, what must we now do differently to ensure that the next chapter of Kenya's development story is fundamentally different from the last? Fellow citizens, there is, however, some good news. We can, we must, and we shall together get it right this time round. History rarely announces the arrival of defining moments. Yet there are occasions when the forces shaping the world create opportunities that come perhaps once in a generation. I believe we are on the threshold of one such historic moment. I believe so for 4 compelling reasons. First, 4 years ago, our priority as a nation was not to imagine Kenya's next chapter. It was to survive global economic turbulence, restore stability, rebuild confidence, and place our economy back on a firm foundation. Together, we achieved that. We have restored macroeconomic stability. We have stabilized our currency. We have rebuilt our foreign exchange reserves to over $15 billion, providing 6.5 months of import cover. Inflation has fallen. Borrowing costs have declined. Investor confidence has returned. Last year, for example, Kenya attracted a record $3.2 billion in foreign direct investment, more than double the amount recorded in 2022. The 2025 IMD World Competitiveness Ranking placed Kenya as the most competitive economy in Africa, reflecting the confidence our reforms have restored. Because we have restored stability, rebuilt investor confidence, and laid a firm foundation for our economy, now is the perfect opportunity for Kenya to begin shaping the next phase of our national development. That is why, in my State of the Nation address last year, I challenged us to begin thinking beyond the immediate demands of today and to start imagining a futuristic roadmap for our nation. That was not simply a call to dream. It was a call to prepare and an invitation to begin building the institutions that will support Kenya's long-term transformation. That journey has already begun. We have already established the National Infrastructure Fund to ensure the investments essential for Kenya's transformation are financed sustainably. It is also why we have established the Sovereign Wealth Fund to preserve and invest the wealth of our nation so that today's prosperity becomes tomorrow's opportunity, shared fairly between present and future generations. Together, these institutions represent more than new opportunities. They embody a philosophy of nation building that lasting prosperity is built through institutions that outlive governments, inspire long-term investment, safeguard intergenerational wealth, and provide confidence in our economy. The second reason why I believe this is our moment is because our current roadmap is approaching its destination. Vision 2030 has brought us this far, but it is approaching its horizon. It has served Kenya well. It transformed the way we think about national development, provided a common direction, inspired investment, guided policy in the public space, and demonstrated the power of long-term planning. But honesty also requires us to acknowledge that some of its ambitions remain unattained. In several respects, we are still falling short of even the very standards we set out for ourselves. Vision 2030 set a target of Kenya becoming an upper middle income country by 2030. So far, we are off target. This is not a criticism of Vision 2030, nor is it a reason for disappointment. Rather, it is an opportunity to proudly learn from our successes, reflect with honesty on where we have fallen short, and define together Kenya's next long-term vision. The third reason why this is our moment is that the next great wave of economic transformation will, I believe, be African. The world is entering what may become the greatest wave of global economic transformation in the past 6 decades. And for the first time in modern history, its center of gravity is steadily shifting towards Africa. Our continent is the home to the world's youngest and fastest growing population, vast reserves of strategic minerals, immense renewable energy potential, abundant arable land, and rapidly expanding consumer markets. 9 of the world's fastest growing economies are in Africa. And by 2050, 1 in every 4 people on earth will be African. Increasingly, global investors, manufacturers, innovators, and policymakers are looking to Africa not merely as a continent of future promise, but as the next frontier of global growth and prosperity. While we may not take full advantage of the previous 3 great waves of global transformation, we have a historic moment and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, not just to be part of, but to lead the next transformation. We have positioned Kenya as one of the nations that will define Africa's economic rise. Fourth, and perhaps most profoundly, this conversation is potent because the time has come to fulfill not only the political and governance promise of our Constitution, but also its equally compelling promise of development, national transformation, and shared prosperity. Fellow citizens, the Constitution envisages both a democratic and a wealthy and prosperous nation. Democracy allows us to organize power, protect liberties, and govern ourselves. Through our democratic institutions, our laws and policy reforms, we have steadily transformed that constitutional principle into a proudly democratic national culture. The next chapter of our national transformation journey is to operationalize the Constitution's development charter. The Constitution establishes our national development mandate. It requires us to build a wealthy, economically developed, and prosperous nation, and defines what government must ultimately achieve. A nation that is just, inclusive, and sustainable. A nation where every Kenyan, regardless of circumstance or place of birth, has a genuine opportunity to thrive. Taken together, the provisions of our Constitution reveal something profound. They affirm that the purpose of state power is not simply to administer the affairs of state, but to expand opportunity, promote human dignity, create wealth, and improve the lives of citizens. Development, therefore, is not simply a policy preference of those who govern. It is a constitutional imperative for the governed. While the Constitution's preamble commits us to build a nation founded on human rights, equality, freedom, democracy, social justice, and the rule of law. Article 10 of our Constitution speaks to patriotism, integrity, accountability, and sustainable development as among our highest national values. Moreover, our Constitution in Article 43 guarantees every Kenyan the right to the highest attainable standard of health, accessible and adequate housing, and reasonable standards of sanitation, freedom from hunger, and adequate food of acceptable quality, clean and safe water in adequate quantities, social security and education, standards of sanitation, freedom from hunger, and adequate food of acceptable quality, clean and safe water in adequate quantities, social security and education. Together, we must ask ourselves what these constitutional guarantees should mean in practice. What should an education system worthy of our constitutional promise look like? What should define accessible and adequate housing for every Kenyan? What kind of health system is required to secure the highest attainable standard of health as is provided for in the Constitution? How do we ensure that no Kenyan experiences the indignity of hunger and that every family has access to adequate food of acceptable quality? How do we guarantee universal access to clean and safe water, meaningful social protection, and the opportunity for every citizen to live a life of dignity? Above all, what measurable outcomes should demonstrate that we are truly giving practical effect to these economic and social rights as contained in our Constitution? Equally, we have not defined with sufficient clarity what patriotism, equality, social justice, and sustainable development should demand of us as government, as institutions, leaders, or citizens. Yet, these constitutional aspirations cannot fulfill themselves. We must, as a nation, collectively define the standards by which they should be measured and establish a common national development charter for their realization. Until we do so, our development and progress will remain subject to the ebb and flow of political expediency, changing priorities, competing interpretations, and fluid guesswork. A national development charter for the attainment of these noble constitutional imperatives cannot be designed by politicians alone, nor by any single institution, profession, or interest group. It must be shaped by the people of Kenya themselves through an open, inclusive, and honest national conversation. For the Constitution belongs to the people, and so too must the vision that gives it practical expression. They demand the wisdom of our farmers and workers, the ingenuity of our entrepreneurs and innovators, the experience of our professionals and scholars, the moral leadership of our faith communities, the energy of our young people, and the participation of every patriotic citizen who believes in Kenya's future. Such a development charter will succeed when anchored on strong institutions, institutions that enable rather than obstruct, that solve problems rather than multiply, that encourage enterprise rather than frustrate, and that make it easier for people to work, invest, innovate, build, and create wealth. Great nations, fellow citizens, are never built by chance. They are built by design, by discipline, and by deliberate, focused national purpose. Ours should be no exception. National development must never be left to chance or short-term politics. It must be guided by a shared national vision that endures beyond administrations and election cycles. A combination of the robust democratic society we have built and a well-crafted national development charter anchored on the economic and social rights enshrined in the Constitution is the potent ingredient necessary for the quantum leap that will make up for past missed opportunities and take us into the first world nation that we rightfully should be. Fellow citizens, Article 3 of our Constitution places a solemn obligation upon every Kenyan to respect, uphold, and defend the Constitution. Every Kenyan. That duty extends beyond merely safeguarding its provisions. It obligates each one of us to build a broad national consensus on the destiny of our republic. The future of Kenya is too important to be left to politicians alone. It must be imagined, shaped, and built by each one and all of us. Patriotism, therefore, is not only measured by what we say about our country. It is also measured by what we contribute to it, what we build for it, and what we protect within it. Once we, as a people, define the national framework for realizing the aspirations in our Constitution, we will have settled the question of our destiny. Thereafter, the true contest of democracy should be about who has the best ideas, the soundest policies, and the best capability to take us. The decisions we make today will determine whether our Constitution becomes the greatest instrument of our national transformation in our history, or the greatest opportunity we missed. The defining task of our generation, therefore, is to forge a shared national development charter that translates constitutional aspirations into deliberate action, measurable progress, and lasting national transformation. This is how constitutional ideals become possibilities. This is how rights become opportunities. This is how aspirations become achievement. And this is how prosperity becomes lived reality. We must not merely state what our Constitution says. We must fulfill its highest purpose. Fellow citizens, this is the conversation I invite our nation to have. It is not a conversation about producing another government document. It is about forging a new national consensus on the country we intend to become and the standards by which we shall measure our progress. It is about translating constitutional ideals into measurable development outcomes, outcomes into better lives, and better lives into national transformation and shared prosperity. If the defining achievement of those who came before us was to give Kenya a constitution worthy of our aspirations, then the defining responsibility of our generation is to build a nation worthy of that constitution. Over the past several months, I have engaged and sought the counsel of current and former national leaders, of political leaders, scholars, business leaders, faith leaders, professionals, civil society, grassroots representatives, and most importantly, young Kenyans from every part of our republic. Those interactions reinforced one conviction above all: a vision worthy of guiding Kenya for the next generation cannot be written by government. It cannot be crafted by a handful of experts, however distinguished they may be. Nor can it emerge from a single institution or political formation. It must be forged through a genuinely people-driven, citizen-centered, and future-focused national process. One that draws upon the collective wisdom, experience, imagination, and aspirations of the Kenyan people, while remaining open to the very best ideas the world has to offer. It was in that spirit that I invited Professor Hiroyuki Hino, Professor Anyang' Nyong'o, and their distinguished colleagues to begin examining Kenya's future beyond the Vision 2030. Last week, I had the honor of receiving their proposals on strategic guidelines for Kenya's long-term national transformation. The thrust of their proposal is both ambitious but also achievable. That Kenya can become a prosperous, high-income, industrialized, and globally competitive nation within one generation, provided we remain united in purpose, disciplined in execution, and unwavering in our commitment to long-term national transformation. These proposals provide the foundation for a much broader national conversation, a conversation that now belongs not to government, nor to the authors of that report, but to every Kenyan. Fellow citizens, somewhere in Kenya tonight is a child too young to understand this address. Some may never remember Vision 2030. Others may never remember even this conversation. But they will live in the Kenya we choose to build. That is why this landmark national conversation is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It is about all of us, and also the generations that will inherit the republic we will leave behind. Our Constitution places public participation at the very heart of governance. It is therefore not merely my desire, but my constitutional duty to ensure that the national vision which succeeds Vision 2030 is shaped through an inclusive, transparent, people-driven, and genuinely national process. Accordingly, on Wednesday, the 12th of August, 2026, we shall formally launch a national conversation on Kenya's future beyond Vision 2030, the most consequential exercise in national reflection and public participation since the promulgation of our Constitution in 2010. We shall bring together every institution of our republic, every county and every generation, leaders from political parties, the private sector, workers' organizations, faith communities, universities, professional associations, innovators, civil society, our creative industry, and above all, our young people will be at the center. In 2010, we gave ourselves a constitution worthy of our dreams. The task of our generation is to build a nation worthy of that constitution. We have secured the foundations of our democracy. Let us now secure the foundations of our prosperity. When we achieve both, we will have fulfilled not only the letter and the spirit of our Constitution, but its highest purpose. Let us rise together, write that next chapter of our republic. God bless you all. God bless Kenya, and I thank you.
Of our collective future together.
Naam, mtazamaji.